Alright, so I want to take another look at a batch of European countries that will be taking part at the upcoming European parliamentary elections in June of this year, a few weeks away from now. And I want to take a look at some countries that I had some people in the comments ask for, notably Ireland, Romania, Portugal, and Sweden. And these four are smaller countries, but they are definitely interesting to look at. And I will probably do maybe one more video looking at some of the other countries. Of course, the EU has a lot of members, a lot of elections all happening on the same day. So it is kind of going to be difficult to cover these elections. I will focus on Germany and try to look over the results briefly from the rest of the countries over the next weeks as we get the results after the elections on June 9th. So this video we will cover these four elections and look at the polls and look kind of what we can expect to happen to see which countries might be important to pay attention to on election day and kind of look afterwards to see what it means for Europe going forward. All right, the first country we want to take a look at is Ireland. Now, Ireland is very interesting because they have a very unique election system in the national level and also at the European parliamentary elections. They have a ranked choice voting system within individual regions within the country. And what this basically means is that the amount of votes that each party gets does not necessarily translate to the amount of seats they get. Of course, a party can win 7% and 2 seats, and then another party can win 11% and only win one. So this is why it's kind of hard to calculate how many seats each grouping will get, but nonetheless, the votes are also important to, symbolize the political power and positions of each party to kind of be a referendum or a check on the incumbent government, kind of a signal for the national elections in the future. And that is kind of similar to every country in Europe. Now, so what's important about Ireland is we've had a major change in the past several years, and that is the left-wing populist, kind of left-wing nationalist party of Sinn Féin has risen to the top in Irish politics, both in the Republic of Ireland, as we see here. This is the Republic of Ireland. This is the nation of Ireland, which makes up the majority of the island in the south. And there's also the Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom. That is, of course, no longer part of the European Union since the UK has left. But Sinn Féin actually competes in both, and they have been able to win victories in both the Republic and the North of Ireland. And what we see here is they are polling at around 23%. They are clearly, ahead of the other parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, Fianna Fáil, the parties of the kind of political middle, which have dominated Irish politics in the past. Now, Sinn Féin is a very interesting political party. They have kind of a controversial past with connections to the IRA and to the kind of very left-wing independence movements. They had some connections to more pro-Soviet, the pro-Palestinian movement, the ANC in South Africa, because they did kind of represent this left-wing nationalist pro-independence movement. They're also kind of comparable to the left-wing Catalonian and Catalan movements in Spain. But the party has definitely moderated themselves. They've had the old guard kind of leave, and a new, more kind of modern, younger generation of politicians have taken over the party, and this has been able to allow them to ascend to one of the dominant parties in Irish politics, and they are clearly ahead here. They are most likely going to win these elections outright, and this will be the first time at the EU level that they win, and this will be a victory, a clear victory for the European left. This will probably be one of the only countries where the European left, that is the European United Left, the kind of far left-wing populist grouping, will win a outright victory, a huge increase in support. This will be almost doubling from what they got in the last EU elections. Now, the two centrist parties, the two kind of center-right parties of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are very similar on the issues. The only difference is, of course, Fianna Fáil is a part of the Renew Liberal group, and Fine Gael is a part of the European People's Party. So they have somewhat different as on their identity and on certain issues, but overall they are very similar. They've kind of ruled Ireland together, and in fact, right now they are together as part of a coalition. Sinn Féin won the last general elections in terms of votes, but these two parties formed a kind of grand coalition bloc together, and we see that they are kind of struggling now. They are both below 20% in some of the polls. They've definitely fallen from the way they've been in the past, and Sinn Féin is clearly ahead of them. Now, what's also important to note is that in Ireland, there is a big emphasis on independence, especially in the EU elections, most notably Claire Daly from the Independence for Change group, a very notable, outspoken left-wing populist figure in the EU Parliament, is running again, and it is likely that she will take some votes away from Sinn Féin, so it is probably likely that Sinn Féin will probably do slightly less at the EU elections than they do on the national level, and this is because of those independents. But nonetheless, Ireland does have a very very strong kind of left-wing populist political core, and so it will be a victory for Sinn Féin. And depending on which of these two parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, win, could be a signal of which of the two will lead this kind of centrist bloc going forward into the future. You also do have the other parties, the Greens and the Labour, which don't play a huge role in Irish politics, but might end up being the kingmaker in future general elections, but they could potentially win a seat at the EU level. But that's pretty much it for Ireland. We have a very, kind of divided political scene between kind of a three-way race between political groupings that some are very similar, some are different, but Ireland will be an interesting country to look at. Now, the next country is Romania. And Romania has a somewhat chaotic political situation at the moment. The two traditional center-left, center-right parties, the National Liberal Party and the Social Democratic Party, have actually formed an alliance. They're running together as one grouping for the EU elections. And we also have the new Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, a part of the ECR group that is kind of surging. They are a very right-wing populist, nationalist Romanian political party, and they won around 9% of the last general elections. They were able to win seats and kind of enter into the political scene. It was expected for them to join the Identity and Democracy group, but at the last minute they ended up joining the ECR. Now, the polls are very, there's a lot of fluctuation in the results they're getting. It's very likely that they will see an increase, potentially doubling the result to around 20%. There's some polls that have them below that, and there's also some that have them upwards of 30%, beating the combined strength of the two major parties that have existed and dominated Romanian politics before. I don't expect them to necessarily beat these parties and win 35%. These are probably going to be outliers, but they will see a large increase in the amount of votes they get. We also have a more kind of liberal conservative grouping, a kind of center-right grouping over here between some of the conservative and liberal parties that are able to fluctuate between 15 to 25%. It's kind of unclear based on this polling who is going to win. It is somewhat of a status quo, a victory. The various, a lot of Eastern European countries have a lot of parties that are members of the EPP and the S&D group. There's, not only one, but three parties we see here part of the EPP group, and it's likely that most of these results will kind of fluctuate. There's not going to be a major change unless we see, the two establishment parties fall to like 20 or 30% or 20%. That will be a big defeat. They got around 50% at the last election, so if they're able to get around 45-50%, that won't be much of a change. The main difference here is how the Alliance for the Unity of Romanians will do. If they're able to get 25%, that will be a big victory for the European right, specifically the ECR, for Maloney and for the Polish Law and Justice Party. Romania is a decently sized country. They are bigger than a lot of the other Eastern European countries, especially in the Balkan area, and so they do have a decent amount of seats. And there's also the Hungarian minority party, which is close to Fidesz, which will maybe get a seat there around 5%, a kind of a minority party. But overall, this is all what we can see for Romania. I mean, this result for the AUR is going to be interesting, whatever they get. But overall, for the other parties, it's kind of it's going to be kind of a status quo result. I mean, even if this party, the ADU, loses some and the PNL gains or vice versa, there's not going to be too much of a change in the balance of power in the country or in Europe overall. There's just going to be mainly the ECR is going to be kind of the big victors of the night. You do also have the SOS, which split off from the AUR, and they are actually a member of the ID group. They're polling between 3 and 8%. They could potentially win a seat or two, but I mean, they are polling, very low in some of the polls, so it's not a guarantee. But that is going to be it for Romania, and we will go on to the next country, which is Portugal. Now, Portugal actually held its national elections earlier this year on March 10th, and there was a significant shift to the right in the country. When we take a look at the results for the main establishment parties, the center-left Socialist Party and the center-right Social Democratic Party, which despite their name, they are a liberal conservative party, part of the EPP group, both of these parties got around 28% in the legislative election, so there was no clear victor. But the reason for the shift to the right was the strong third-place result of 18% of Chega. Now, Chega is a right-wing populist nationalist party, part of the ID group, and they were able to win enough seats and able to have a majority with the Conservatives. Despite this, the Conservatives saw Chega as kind of too right-wing and have not formed a government coalition with them. And so the status of the current government is kind of up in the air. There could be a minority government tolerated by the Socialists. But nonetheless, when we take a look at the results for the EU elections, we see there is a somewhat of a fluctuation with what there was the legislative elections earlier this year. Now, the socialists are clearly in first place. They're around 32% in the polls, so this is a victory for them. They are beating the conservatives. However, they're not at the critical mass of support they've had in the past, the amount of support they would need to overcome the combined result of the various right-wing parties to maybe form a government on their own or with some of the other left-wing parties. So it is a victory for them, but it's not a symbolic, enough victory to show that they are ready to run the country on their own. And for the conservatives, although they're in second place, this is slightly ahead of what they got at the last EU elections and also the national elections. This is going to be a moderate result for them. I think for both of the establishment parties, this is kind of going to be a somewhat satisfying, okay result. This is something they're going to be very okay with. Now, for Chega, they are definitely underperforming in the polls what they got at the last general elections, and so this does seem as a defeat for them in some way, but also when you compare it to the last EU elections where they got less than 1% of the vote, this is definitely a victory. Now, what's important is that oftentimes in EU elections, not every EU-wide political party has a member in each European country, meaning a lot of times there's a country of several million people where a European-wide party is not getting any votes. And so the fact that the ID group has established a party here that's been able to compete and get, double digits, around 10% at least of the vote is significant for them because this is able to, get them some seats, get them some votes. And so even if the 10% is well below what they got at the last general election, this is a big increase from what they got at the last EU election. So it will be a victory for them, big victory for Chega and for the ID group as a whole. And we could still see them get maybe 14% or maybe close to the 18% they got at the EU elections. We'll have to see. But nonetheless, a underperformance of what they got at the general election, but still a victory for the party that they've been able to kind of assert themselves into the EU and political scene in Portugal altogether on different national levels. Now, there was also the liberal group of the Renew EU party, and they are at around 5 to 10%. They're probably going to get at least one seat, but we see kind of some fluctuation here. This is, an okay result for them. But overall, the main focus is, of course, going to be Chega, which is going to be helping the ID group and the two establishment parties, which are very strong here in Portugal. Now, when we look at Sweden, again, we have interesting results in the polls that can be seen as a victory or a defeat depending on which election you contrast it to. Now, the Social Democratic Party, which has dominated Swedish politics in the past, is clearly ahead in first place at around 30%. This is a slight underperformance of what they're polling for the general election, but if we contrast it to the EU elections last time, this is an increase of around 5 to 7 points. And Sweden is one of the few countries in Europe where we actually see a victory for the left, a victory not only for the S&D group, for the left as a whole, and this is a very big contrast to a lot of the countries in Europe that is seeing kind of a shift to the right. Now, the Social Democrats, this is going to be a victory for them. They are clearly ahead in first place. They're going to win by potentially upwards of 10 points ahead of the second largest party. So a big victory for them. We look at the other left-wing parties. We see there is some fluctuation between the Greens and the left. They're somewhat in line with what they've got in previous elections. We could see, the left gain a seat, the Greens lose a seat, but overall, the various left-wing parties that have made up former governments are kind of, staying the same. And we see what is very important here is that the results for these three left-wing parties is outperforming the current government, the government of the kind of center-right and liberal parties supported by the right-wing Sweden Democrats. So this is definitely a referendum on the current incumbent center-right government, and this is a victory for the left, showing that potentially they could retake power on the national level in the future. Now, the results for the two center-liberal parties, the more agrarian, social democratic aligned, kind of left-wing liberal center party and the more right-wing liberal party are basically both below 5%. They're definitely struggling, and this is down from what they've got in previous elections, so they are definitely going to both have a hard time winning seats, and we could see maybe these parties fall out of the Swedish political scene, but I think it's too early to say that for now. Now, on the right, we have the two main parties. We have the more moderate party. It's part of the EPP group, getting around 17-18%. This is an okay result for them. This is kind of in line with what they've got in previous elections, but this is not necessarily where they want to be. They are not, this is a third place finish for them, and for one of the establishment parties, it's definitely not where they want to be. And this was kind of okay for them, but this is kind of going to be an unsatisfying result for the party. Now, for the Sweden Democrats, which has been active in Swedish politics for a long time now, this is going to be a victory for them. Now, of course, they are not winning first place. They are slightly underperforming what they got in the last general election in some of the polls, kind of get around 18-19%. However, when you compare this to the last EU election, they are getting, around 4 or 5 points more. And usually the Sweden Democrats does do worse in the EU elections than they do in the general election, so this is kind of in line with what's happened in the past. So this will be a victory for them and kind of the ECR group as a whole. showing that they are able to hold on to the moderate support that they have, and also presenting themselves as the second largest party in the country as they were in the general election. Now they are a part of the government, and officially they tolerate the current government. They are the support and confidence for the minority government that rules the country. But this result is a minor victory for the Sweden Democrats, a minor victory for the Social Democrats. But overall, as a whole, if the left is able to outperform the right as a whole, that is going to be very important and very symbolic for Sweden going forward at the next national elections. So that's going to be it for this video, and I hope everyone enjoyed. And if you do, please like, share, and subscribe. I will do some more videos on some other EU countries, and of course Germany again as the next couple of weeks come. And I hope everyone enjoys these videos, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you all for watching.